Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our Fullcast Fireside Chat. Your host, Tyler Simons. I'm the head of customer success at Fullcast, and we are the go-to-market planning and execution platform. Today's topic, we're going to be talking a little bit about program management and how it can actually help deliver territories for next fiscal year's planning, maybe actually deliver them on time. I don't know. Today's guest is Lisa. And Lisa, why don't you go ahead and give us a little spiel?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. First time doing a fireside chat, so I'm really humbled to be a guest on here. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Vo. I'm a program manager at Okta. So Okta, we're a platform to secure identity and an easy solution to implement authentication and authorization services for every app.
Great. So we were talking before we started this thing, and I was kind of half joking about how I knew nothing about program management, which is probably kind of true. But I wanted to just start really at the very beginning, which is, can you just tell us in your own words, what is program management?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand what differentiates like program management from project management, because I think a lot of people kind of use that interchangeably, and they may sound very similar or have some like very similar practices and components, but they're actually very different. So over in program management, what you're essentially doing is you're managing a bunch of projects, and those collection of projects actually make up a program. And so you're making sure that you're ensuring, the people and the team are really focused and collaborating across the functions just to achieve that strategic vision of the program. So, a program manager is very focused on like the strategy and the implementation. How are we prioritizing these projects and making sure that we're articulating the goals of the program and how that's all going to impact the business. On the other hand, with project managers or project management, it's very tactical. So, you're focusing on more of like the operational piece, making sure like projects are actually meeting like deadlines, you're staying within budget and you're really making sure you're completing those deliverables. Not saying that program management doesn't focus on all that, but we do take like a more holistic approach of looking across multiple projects and programs, and we're not just focusing on that one project.
So it's thinking about an example, right? And we talked about territories on time, and we're starting. Everyone's probably, especially everybody that's got that January fiscal year, those conversations are starting to happen where they're talking about next fiscal year's planning. So I'm thinking like from a program management perspective, there's probably a project that pertains to, let's say, territory planning. But there's also maybe a project that pertains to like cleaning up the data, maybe assigning quotas. Is that kind of like an example of like a program manager might oversee those multiple projects to make sure that they're all kind of working to, like all the people everybody's working together to see like a common goal?
Yeah, so you want to think as a program manager more like I like to say like a linchpin. So they're really helping you find connection points between all these projects, and they're really building like a way of working cross-functionally so that the team is actually moving and marching that same direction towards that initiative or towards that project or that program. Things like I like to say, I'm just like thinking through and out loud here is, sometimes like program managers can actually take responsibilities of revenue operation managers. So like things you can think about like headcount. I would always say like program managers like to get their hands dirty. Yeah, that's the type of program manager I like to work with. And so you're thinking through your head count. You can actually, I've done this before, being at All Zero, where I had to actually carve territories. So really going in there and doing some of the execution will be very helpful, especially if you're tight on resources, which that actually happened to us at All Zero. I think we were a team of 3. And so I had to, kind of take both the program management, my skills and all that stuff, make sure that everybody's marching towards that same timeline and that same initiative. and also go in and say, hey, where can I help you? And they're like, okay, we need you to help us carve territories because you have some sales operation experience.
So what do you think are like the key components of a project lifecycle?
Yeah, so the way that I want to think about, I guess, like, let me just define like kind of the project life cycle, and then I'll kind of outline like what I think that we should hit on. So there's actually 4 stages to a project life cycle, and this is going to make sure that you're guiding each of the project to success, which will in turn and result in helping your program. So the first stage is the initiation stage. So you're pretty much like defining, you're building out your business case. You're trying to understand like what are the objectives. You're making your, your initial scope and kind of understanding what your key deliverables are for that project. And you're identifying the stakeholders that are going to be impacted or be part of that project. So think of the way you're kind of making that project charter. And then you have your next step, which is like that planning phase. Like this is what needs to get done. So go out there, figure out how we plan to do it, and then kind of break down that larger project into bite-sized pieces and tasks. And you're mobilizing your team and you're preparing that schedule for the completion of these assignments. And then at this time, you're pretty much doing like a kickoff with the team so that they can understand what the project is about. And then you have your third stage, which technically people always say there's 4 to 5 stages, but I like to combine this stage. So this is like the execution / like monitoring stage. So this is like, let's go do it. So you're pretty much like, as a program manager or project manager, you're like keeping track of the progress. You're providing like the status reports for each of the teams or like upper management. You're kind of briefing your team on like, hey, this is what you need to do. This is the definition of done. And you're really providing that guidance of how that work should be completed. And at the same time, you're trying to manage the timelines and the quality of the project and the performance of the project. And also you're making sure that, hey, like what we had planned is actually going originally to plan. And then you have the last phase, which is the closing. And this is like my favorite like part of the project lifecycle phase, because then you're pretty much delivering the final deliverable. You're releasing all your project resources and you're trying to understand and determine if your project was successful or not. So what that means is if the project's goals were met, or if you actually initially solve the issue or the problem. And then from there, you can do like a retrospect with your team where you're trying to get everybody together and say, okay, so what did we do well? What do we need to do better? What can we do for next time? And what still puzzles us? So really take that learning, and then you can apply it to the next project or program.
Is closing your favorite just because you're tired of looking at the project? You're like, finally, it's done. I'm out of here.
That moment, there's those projects where you're just like, actually, I wish that, we could continue on. And those are typically programs, right? Those are more long-term view because it's more strategic. And then there's those projects where you're like, all right, I think the whole team is ready to, go to happy hour and just get yourself a beer and just celebrate.
Yeah. So, but in all seriousness, what is the favorite part of why is closing your favorite part? Is it actually just because you're like, this is done and I'm like getting that satisfaction, or is there like a piece to this that you really enjoy?
Yeah, it's that. And also I think one of the biggest things, it's being able to celebrate with your team, to say like, hey, we achieved something really big. And also like my favorite part in the closing is the retrospective. I think it's the most valuable tool in the lesson for the team. Honestly, it doesn't cost much. You get everybody together for like an hour and a half, and it really pays off in the long run because you get to apply those lesson learned to the next project. Because a lot of times, a lot of these projects, especially if you're doing annually, for example, like territory planning, you're going to have to know what happened historically and then try to figure out how we can improve for the next cycle.
Could we talk
Yeah, go for it.
about an example of like what a retrospective would look like for territory planning?
Yeah, so when I do a retrospective, the way I like to collaborate first with the team is just doing through I don't know if you ever like heard of the tool called Miro. It's like a
Hmm.
very
Yeah,
collaborative
it's
process.
like Miro, Lucid Chart, like a charting type tools,
Yeah, so that's
or like whiteboarding.
Yeah, so that's the format that I try to use with the team because I think it's, especially virtually, because nowadays I think we have a lot of people that are remote. But if you do have a chance, like you can also do it in person as well too, and you have a whiteboard with a bunch of sticky notes, and make sure to bring donuts because that's going to entice the team even more. Um, and the way that I do the retro is through, you know, it's the concept is like roses, thorn, and buds. So like roses, I always like to say like, our team, we're always at all zero. We were really hard on ourselves. We really focused on the thorn side, like, the thorn in your side, like whether the challenges are. But I want to make sure that people have time to actually smell the roses and really understand, hey, we achieved something really big. So let's make sure that we understand what we did really well. And then budding is kind of like, hey, what's that next potential? What can we do better next time? What are we going to do? What's an actionable item that we can improve on? And then make sure that we're checking in. For territory planning, I think what we've done really well as a team, especially for a team of 3, is I think that positivity, having that collaboration aspect and having that support. And so, and also I would say using Fullcast was a great tool for us that helped us with our territory carving. It made it really easy and efficient. So what I really like about the Fullcast tool for territory carving was it helped us, sync data really easily between our systems. We were able to create hierarchies and nodes and make it easy to territory manage everything and also do the carving within that. And I love the visual map that you guys provide us, and you just have to click through. Very, very user friendly.
Thanks for selling our tool, but
Hey,
the
I'm only selling it only because I truly believed in the tool, and it was a great tool to have.
but
Now,
let's from a program manager perspective, you are guiding that conversation, right? Like you in this retrospective, you're kind of you're the person that's saying, hey, let's talk through the roses, put your sticky notes up, and then you kind of coalesce and group like things together. And then at the end of that, maybe you disseminate that information further and send that out. Correct? Is that kind of just how that
so we're
all
like
goes
the
together?
facilitator, you would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That works. So let's talk about why I want to keep this moving because we don't have too much time, and I want to get to the details of just how a program manager can actually help deliver these territories specifically on time, because that's the one thing we see the most often is missed timings for territories being ready before SCOs or before the fiscal year start, whatever that goal is, and that time is money. So anyway, we'll get to that. But why do you think in your world a program manager is so important for a revenue operations team? And you've seen both sides of this. You've been a revenue operations manager, you've planned, you've done all the tactical stuff, and now you've switched into this program manager role. So be curious to hear your perspective on why is it so important to have somebody in a program management role?
Yeah, so I think the going back to where the linchpin and making sure that we find that connection point, because a lot of times each team depends on another team for some sort of deliverable or some sort of handoff. So we're making sure that we're beating people with a stick over their head and saying hey, remember, so and so on this team needs this XYZ output, and so we need to make sure that we're hitting that timeline. And I did not mean to say really beating people with a stick, but metaphorically, making sure that we're shining the light on these interdependencies that we have identified. I think another thing that's super important to think about is a lot of times I've noticed with territory planning, things can slip due to decision makings. And so in startups, like it's a lot easier and a lot faster to make decision versus like in corporation, there's like a whole bureaucracy, and you got to go through all these like approval process and all these different folks to make sure that they're all aligned. So a program manager can really help facilitate and rope everybody together, making sure that we have the right folks at the table, right, in order to make those decisions. Another thing I wanted to say is like, key important thing is like making sure people are adhere to what we originally planned in the project in the timeline. And that's like one of the key things that program managers can help do is really make sure that people understand what they're responsible for and also define the roles and responsibility of each person in assigning that particular task. Because if people don't really know what they're actually doing or what they're trying to deliver and who they need to pass it off to, then that's just going to cause chaos. And the meme that I always think about, if you try to like, if you don't have a program manager or a project manager in general to do this, is that dog that sits on the chair and there's like fire around them and he goes, "This is fine." That's what I think about when we don't have a program manager, especially when you have a much larger team, and everybody starts like specializing. We want to make sure that we're breaking down those silos so that people are communicating. And I think that's another pain point I've noticed around just like delivering like territories. A lot of times like we're waiting on somebody, but they don't know that they're supposed to communicate that over to us, like the decisions or who to communicate to. So we have to make sure that we're outlining and make sure that they understand like, hey, once you finish this and all the business requirements that's required, you need to make sure that you're handing off and you need to make sure that you're communicating to that person, or you need to make sure you're communicating up the ladder, down the ladder, etc. So having that communication plan is really important too.
I want to spend you said something interesting earlier where you talked about, making decisions. and I don't think that this is just pertains to large corporations. I actually think this is also as startups start to grow and you bring in more people, there's like this in-between phase where you were so small and there's quick decisions that could be made. And you were talking about like a team of 3, like that's pretty easy to make those decisions. But if you grow to, let's say, even 5 or 6 or 7 people, there becomes more and more of these voices that everybody needs to hear, and we need to take in this feedback and then make these decisions, which can slow down territory planning. And I've seen this happen. Is there anything that you've got, like tips, tricks, or anything to like help make sure that we like you've got this overall like timeline of, I know we need to start this at this time and we need to deliver here, and we've got these big decisions that get made? Is there anything that's like the silver bullet for making sure that these decisions get made on time so that you can keep the overall, project or territory planning thing on time?
Yeah, that's a great question. The top of thing that I can think about is making sure that you're roping in those folks that are making those critical decisions early in the process. I
Mm,
think that's the only way that you can make sure that you have alignment, because if they can understand when these decision points need to be made, and if they don't make the decision, like what, like if this was missed, like how is that going to impact these other decision or these other deliverables? And they need to understand that. So I think one of the biggest things is just making sure, again, like we have those folks involved early and bring them along. And that's
yeah.
that's the key thing I always say, bring them along. We don't want to do where we say, hey, last minute, just you need to make a decision on this, and that will never go well. So making sure that at the beginning of the kickoff, like they should also be part of that kickoff as well too. And you can have multiple kickoffs, right, for different levels of individuals. So you can have kickoffs for your project team, and then you have another kickoff for your leadership team, and those are the folks that need to make those decisions.
Yeah, I bet like I bet you correct me if this is like the wrong stage to be thinking this in, but like I mean everyone's like thinking, like, why do I need to plan? Because we're territory planning and I don't need to do this. But there's a piece of this also that I think like, hey, if you do the right set of planning before you actually start planning, you'll identify the decisions that need to be made, the data or the reports or whatever that is that need to like help the person that needs to make this decision or the team that needs to make this decision, make sure that all that stuff's ready for that. So that keeps everything all on track rather than like, you get a month away from needing to deliver territories and you're like, oh, I need this type of data to be able to make this decision, but it's not ready. So we got to go clean that data. And then you're like, oh, there's all these things that we forgot about. So we talk about, we've got companies that got ton of resources, ton of people. There's plenty of people that watch this that are like, well, it's me and 4 other people in RevOps, or we're a small team. And I think you and I have both agreed, like, it doesn't have to be like you got to have this whole program management team and like this whole big thing, right? So I was wondering if you could just walk us through maybe the different stages of maturity as you like move into program management, or at least kind of like break down what's a good starting point to think through as you're like, I need to go to this, but where can we start?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I think about it, it's you hit it right on the spot. It's really dependent upon where the company is at that may dictate the different levels of PMing, or people like say PMO, the project management office that you need. So the way that we want to think about it, it's not a rigor where it's not a rigid scale where it's just black and white. It's basically, like a slow progression scale, and there's like a list of guidelines. And as you mature, your PMO and your PM process should also as well too, how you're managing your projects and your programs. And so that things that you have to think about is like, how do we manage our governance, like our program governance, the type of tools that you're using to manage all the activities and the dependencies, how much of a communication plan do you need to put into detail, and kind of think about like risk assessment or risk management. So the scale ranges from the initial process all the way to the optimizing process, and in between you kind of have these like stages. So the first stage is the initial process. So I like to think about it like you're like Bambi, right? You're learning to walk for the first time. And if you're a builder like me, this is like your favorite stage. You're doing everything from scratch. So during this stage, there's like a lack of processes, there's a lack of documentation, there's really low implementation of the PM tools, and there's different teams using different ways to manage their deliverables, and that's going to result in like lack of accountability or some cohesion between the teams. I also want to emphasize, I know a lot of people like metrics, but during this stage, this is where folks are just collecting metrics like ad hocly, and that makes it really difficult to evaluate the project success and the future of the project or the program. And then you have your second stage. As you start growing, you move up, right? You have a little bit more structure, process, and standards. So this is very basic project management or program management, and this is done more on the individual level of a project. So there's various project management or program management like methodologies used across the different teams. So an example is like at Auth0, sales, like our team sales operations, we were managing our projects a lot differently from like marketing operations, even though we both sat under revenue operations. And so when we try to collaborate, there might be a little bit of disconnect. And then you have your third, as you keep going up the ladder, you have more it's the organizational standards and institutional process. So this is more like well-defined procedures. That's kind of like the standard way of doing things. And this is where, you might see like a PMO that pops up. And then management, they're pretty proactive in being involved in implementing all these like new processes and like any change management across the organization here. And then on the metrics part there, you're just establishing the baseline. You're not ready to use it to plan strategic in the future, but you're just like really just learning like, okay, what's the standard here. And then in documentation, everybody starts caring about documentation, which is great, and then things are actually getting like recorded. And then you have your fourth stage, which is like more like the manage process. So this is like really clear, defined PM processes, and you have like really clear documentation in place. And during this stage, you'll see a lot of PMs applying everything from the previous stage. And management is really like they're actually monitoring the metrics. So PMs have to be really good at keeping track of those. And they can use that information or that past performance and really make decisions for any, initial key initiatives that they want to do in the future. And then you have the last phase, which is the optimizing process. So now that you have everything like all set up, this is where the optimization kicks in. So you're trying to adapt your processes in an effort to maintain that like productivity and that inefficiency and the efficiencies, right? So then you're able to make that strategic plan moving forward. What I really want to emphasize about these stages here that, there might be a time where one org really cares about, let's say, metrics or documentation, even though they're at the beginning of the state, that initial phase, but they might be more mature in those components for the stages. So again, it's like a sliding scale, and these are just guidelines. It's not like you're on this stage, okay, you're here. Again, it's a scale.
I don't want a sliding scale. I need concrete facts. It needs to be rigid.
I was gonna say you work really well at a corporation then, Tyler.
I want to distill this down. We're kind of getting closer to our time limit here, but if you had to pick, I'm going to say two. That way it's not just one. It's going to be two key aspects of program management that everybody really should be doing, regardless of size, right? No matter, like, let's take these like two little things. What would those be?
Well, my favorite part, like mentioned, the retrospective. That's like the number one thing. And then
I am a big supporter of that, by the way. I just think
I'm glad we're aligned.
I'm a big supporter of it. I don't do it, but I'm a big supporter of it. No, I'm kidding. But like, I think that is the biggest thing that everybody always misses, because they deliver that project and then they just want to forget about it. And there's no actual like, well, how did we do? What did we do well? Just like, again, the retrospective aspect, because that's how you improve something for the next time you do it. And I think that gets forgotten or pushed off to the side. So that's huge. All right, let's move on to the next one.
Oh, my second one, I think, is really, and I think this gets overlooked a lot, is creating a communication plan and really over communicate. Again, I've seen a lot of this is a trend across like all companies that I've been at, especially with startups. I've seen it's very difficult for folks to like communicate up the ladder, then down the ladder. We want to make, and even like across teams, I've noticed that's a thing. And so, I think it's a general like good strategy for a PM to over communicate and communicate more than you think you need to, because a lot of people like to make assumptions, and you can't assume. Like my philosophy that I always go by is trust but verify. Me asking those clarifying questions, or you got to ask those questions even though you may know, but you want to make sure that everybody else is aligned with you as well too, because not everybody's going to have the same level of understanding. And I've noticed that like we experienced this at Okta, like during this planning phase right here, and then also at Auth0 the exact same way as well too. So I would say like it's really huge and important to build that that culture and make sure the team is really centered around that communication piece.
You talk about, you talk about the communication plan. By that, you mean like, what is the plan at each stage of, let's say, territory planning, since we're talking about it, at each phase? Who are we going to communicate to? How are we going to communicate it? And like kind of lay that out. It's not just necessarily like a rule of just like, hey, make sure you communicate this stuff, or we're going to communicate in this channel, but like really identifying the people that need to be communicated and what type of information, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it on the mark there.
Woo! All right, I'm ready to start my program management career.
I was going to say, ace your test.
Yeah.
Certified.
All right, so we've got a special question for you. So why don't I mean, maybe we're just about a time, and I want us to wrap up and just talk about, like, why do you like PMing? And I guess what is the PM superpower?
Okay, so I'm a dork. So I'm a huge fan of jigsaw puzzles, and I can relate this to PMing. So if you think about PMing, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. When you first get a program or a project, right, you have all these like pieces that are spread out on the table, and you're trying to understand, like, hey, what do we need to do in order to achieve the outcome? So in the jigsaw puzzle, you're starting around your corners, right? And then you build your borders. And so that's where you understand your key deliverables. And then you start finding these like chunks of pieces and details, and you start building these islands. And I think the most exciting part for me as a PM is when you have this aha moment where you can actually connect those large land masses, I guess, of puzzles. And so that's like your dependencies. And you're like, oh, wow, okay. So now I know that this person needs this, and I can help with that. So I think that's what makes PMing really fun for me. But also, I think just the challenge, right? You're always operating in some uncertainty, and then you're learning something new every day. And so, things may not go according to plan, and then something unexpected happen. And so that always keeps me on toes. So I'm like a adrenaline junkie, I would say, on that piece. For PM superpower, I would say, I think like it's important to be able to be hands-on, get your hands dirty. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, because I think your team will definitely appreciate it. Because it depends on what type of PM you are. You could be more hands-on or hands-off, but I think your team will definitely be more empathetic, and definitely like follow you and see you as a leader if you're able to help with some of their pieces of moving things forward, right? You can unblock. And sometimes it might be that they need some help actually doing the deliverable. And it's also another way to best learn new skills.
Yeah, it's what keeps things interesting.
Yeah.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real treat.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks, Tyler, for having me.
Yep. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining. Have a good one. See ya.
Bye.